The answer would be no in almost every city, town, and forest, but in the town that is home to one of the oldest and largest aspen trees in the world, though it's more of a forest made up of genetically identical clones. This forest, from which the charming little town gets its name, borders practically the entire area. This means that if one were to look out the window of any residential building as unremarkable as Aspen appears to the outside world, some astute people in the know discovered that the town was constantly bathed in bright sunlight, day and night, unlike some of its bordering neighbors whose harsh winters brought only the most depressing weather. Henry Hank Morgan was one of those people who, because to his extensive network and huge pockets, realized that Aspen View was more than simply a town, it was an opportunity. Simply think of the economic effects of urbanizing a place like this. Drew A.L.'s attention, in addition to employment opportunities including night shifts and daylight soaks, the town was mired in the past and its shadows would not go away due to its fast agricultural growth and other factors. It was common in these small towns to disregard the welcome signs, which were already outdated, and there was no one who needed to be welcomed anyhow, but this would soon change. Al knew exactly what he needed to do with a dilapidated town: demolish it, start over, and reclaim the Aspen View white sign. It was almost 11 a.m., but the twilight above was brighter than the afternoon sun. Al took a deep, refreshing breath and smiled, letting the sunlight dance on his face through the open window as he realized he already loved Aspen and simply had to have it stepping into the town's only motel with a few necessities for the short trip. He pictured the car driving through a thicket of dense aspen trees, mere outlines against the harsh sun that peered through them, until it reached a clearing of tall grass, and the town was located in the center of that clearing. The town was even smaller than he had imagined, with only a dozen or so buildings packed around a tiny town square, a charming and picturesque view, like something out of a Courier and IES print. When the doorbell rang, Al went up to the front desk of a small office where an elderly woman was waiting for him. He observed as she nodded and smiled politely, saying, "Good evening," while remaining motionless in her tall chair. "Welcome to Sunset Motel." Al chuckled as he sat down his bag. "There isn't much of a sunset here," he said. "Yes." Well, she nodded. "This place is the closest thing to it should you need to rest your head." He nodded as he looked around the place, colorful yet earthy. It must have been the dimmest sight within the entire city, and even still it was bright as day. The lights that cast onto the woman's pale and wrinkled skin showcased those dark bags under her eyes, far more numerous than the single one that Al brought along with him. "I take it you don't have a reservation?" she asked, likely as a formality. Looking up at Al, he shook his head. "I didn't know I needed one." He smiled, looking about the place. "We're actually completely vacant." She grinned. "So please take your pick." She lifted her hand in reference to the keys that swung silently along the wall, coated in layers of decorative foliage. Al pressed the key marked number 1 into the corresponding lock and pushed it open. An escaping scent of mildew puffing out into the hallway. He turned back to face the woman still seated behind her desk as he asked for an air freshener. "Oh, we don't have those here, sir." What hotel didn't? Trying to sleep while sunbeams poured into the motel room was nearly impossible, but somehow Al managed to squeeze in a solid half hour on the rickety bed. Had the blinds did their best to hold back the rays, thanks in part to the greenery that grasped the sunlight along the frosty glass, but it was the optical implications that kept Al awake, not to mention everything on his mind, and the smell the following morning was an odd blend of sunshine and rain clouds, not dark enough to nap and not bright enough to truly wake. The plucky taps across the foggy glass window turned into heavy thuds of rain droplets that rattled the motel and maybe the entire town Aspen View porch, all the while the rain bombarding him from above, his clothes clinging to his frail and aging form. Yet he seemed not to notice nor mind, as if he were completely dry and dandy. When the rain let up, Al decided to take a short meander over to the man carefully maneuvering mud puddles with his pristine shoes as he strolled about the town, feeling eyes watching him from unknown places, yet none were present aside from the old man's mourning. He spat, gesturing a toe as he continued to rock from behind the porch fence as Al approached. His smile diminished. The man, despite being drenched in the thick rainwater, was burnt, parts of his already tanned skin peeling and seared from the sun like a badly cooked marshmallow-fetid pus protruding from the cracks in his wrinkled face. The chair that clacked against the aged wood was also baked, licked clean of its once musky brown color in exchange for a sun-bleached bronze. The most odd thing about him was that he behaved as though nothing had changed. "Good morning," Al said uneasily, looking at the sopping wet man up and down. "You need a towel," he said, looking down and realizing that he was soaked. "A little water never hurt anybody," he smiled. Al returned the smile, but it was more due to nervousness than true joy at this moment. "What brings you by?" the man inquired, his dimple smiling face splitting into his paw. "I am intrigued about this place, which is beautiful but seems to be abandoned, therefore I was hoping someone might tell me more about it." The old man nodded and clicked a stream of water dripping from his red nose. He looked up, prompting Al to do the same. "That sun," he said, failing to squint at the orange-yellow ball, "is out here all day and all night. Lots of folks can't sleep when the sun's out." "Tell me about it," Al said, scratching behind his neck. "You were a city slicker too then, huh?" the old man asked. Al nodded. "City slickers don't do well out here. That's why I'm hoping to bring the city to you," Al said, unfolding and extending a piece of paper labeled "Paring Corners," scribbled with the rush of plans he had drawn late in a bright night with his trusty carpenter's pencil now fidgeting within his sweaty palm. The old man's unblinking eyes grew narrow as they washed over the plans, then darted to that trusty pencil. "You a biter?" "Excuse me," Al said, not expecting that question out of all that could have been asked. The old man lifted his dried-out finger towards the hand set around the carpenter's pencil lined with tiny teeth. "Yeah, I guess so. Did you taste it?" the old man said, folding back up the plans. "Did I taste the cedar wood that pencil's made from? Or did you forget that it takes a dead tree to make a pencil? How about this paper?" he asked, holding it back up to Al, who took it nervously. "You think paper just grows on trees?" he laughed. "And they destroy the entire thing because it consists of a few similar cedar and ponderosa bits that are meant for you to scribble that nonsense." His unwavering eyes gazed solemnly into the sky as his quivering finger kept pointing at the page. "You think you're just going to walk into our town and act like you own the damn place just because you got some paper?" he asked. He gave a gloomy laugh. "No, and this town has been buried multiple times, but it always comes back, even if you try to kill it." The old-timer interrupted. "Can you imagine how productive your father would be if he were anything like you?" "I don't mean to offend you, sir," Al said quietly, crinkling the paper and pushing it back into his coat. "I see so many possibilities with this." Al pointed above him. The man said, "This town has a long history of men trying to claim it." The old man said, "Our roots go back to the Ata tribe, and nothing has changed since their blood soaked the ground for a town that had never seen night. It appears that there have been some dark days, which is terrible." "All right, wait, Atna. What about the amenities?" he asked after the old man excused him, followed by a rant and a nod. Al shook his head at the sun. "My father," Al acknowledged that he wanted me to join the family business, and he paid for my education. Al made the decision to examine the town further, which involved briskly peeping into every nook and cranny as the crunchy leaf-lined pathways snapped beneath his fancy shoes and the man's rickety rocking chair rocked his ailing body back and forth. The sound reverberated throughout the desolate town, except for the creaks, clanks, the occasional bird coo, and the crunching of the leaves. If tranquility meant peace, it lacked such tranquility. Who would want to live here? Aspen View was to be completely rebuilt, using the red mill that covered its rundown homes as the basis. There was a lot of work to be done, so he would start in the summer, and within 5 years, the remnants would be gone and no one would miss it except maybe the old man and whoever else managed to survive in such an environment. Al thought to himself as he drew beneath a tall aspen tree overlooking the entire town as the rain clouds faded into the sun. He hadn't eaten lunch yet, and based on his observations of the town's offerings, there didn't seem to be any restaurant, diner or food in sight, not that he had an appetite initially. He was about to turn the corner to head back to the motel when the woman sitting motionless on the bench in Lush Park beckoned him to halt. The sun would have been setting at this point, but the woman wasn't moving. He asked, hearing exactly what the woman had said on the quiet street, hoping that she had ended the conversation completely. As it seemed that in many of these charming little towns, one person's business was everyone else's. He wasn't afraid to show her his plans, just like he did with the old man, and just like that man, the woman displayed great opposition. "Did I tell you this will never work?" The blank-eyed woman stared. He was like the old man, frail and deeply tanned, wearing aerated, pale clothes lined with tiny strands of clutched ivy parting. Eyal's brows creased in the stern sun. The walk back to the motel just confirmed his current state of mind. "I've never met you before, ma'am," he replied impatiently, demanding the page back. She gave it to him, although it wasn't such a bad idea. He was driven past the motel and into the nearby drugstore by owls, whose eyes were pierced by the weeds and vines that overgrew into and onto the nearby buildings, the moss that covered a large portion of the narrow path, and the dreary and cramped atmosphere of such a lovely oasis. If he was returning home in the